Last time we played an improvised game of Who Wants to Be a Gazillionaire? 10 simple questions about the Roman Empire. And obviously, it wasn't about playing games, but about common misconceptions and funny historical facts about ancient Rome, with some humor here and there. This time, we're doing the same thing, but with ancient Greece. Who Wants to Be a Gazillionaire? Greek edition. 10 simple questions about ancient Greece. We're gonna start with a super easy question. It is a mandatory question for any quiz about ancient Greece. It is a question about the 300 Spartans. What was the number of Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae? A. 300. B. 4,000. C. 7,000. D. 298. All these answers are correct, depending on how you count. According to the sources, Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, the total number of Greek warriors at the Battle of Thermopylae was probably around 4,000. So if you count Spartans and their allies, probably this is your number. But it is also possible to count around 7,000. So this number might be correct as well. But if by Spartans you mean the citizens of Sparta, the correct word is Spartiates. And the traditional number is 300. If you deduce one wounded guy and the one they sent off, you will have 298. But the number of 300 is legendary and shouldn't be perceived as the exact number. But no, the Spartan hoplites were not alone there. There were Thespians, Thebans, other people. All of the Spartans and all of the Thespians died there. The total number of casualties was probably around 4,000, but we don't know for sure. Since we're talking about Spartans, let's discuss their famous practice of choosing the most fit and healthy children so they could eventually become super soldiers. What did Spartans do to weak and deformed babies? A. Threw them off the cliff. B. Sold them to Athens. C. Disposed of them. D. Nothing. And the correct answer is C. Disposed of them. How exactly? We don't know. Probably just like everybody else. I mean, yeah, like everybody else. It is usually presented as a special feature of the Spartan society. They wanted super soldiers, so ill-born babies had to go. No, all the Greek world was doing that. It had nothing to do with the idea of creating perfect soldiers. The child mortality rate was very high. Ill-born infants were basically doomed. No point in raising a child if he or she will be dead in a few years anyway. So they were usually exposed, like left somewhere in the woods, for example. And throwing infants off the cliff? There is no evidence. It is probably a myth. Next question. Which city was the capital of Greece during the Persian Wars? A. Athens. B. Sparta. Okay, I'll just stop here. There was no such country as Greece, and this question doesn't make any sense. I'm mentioning that because a surprising number of people just don't understand the extent of the Greek world in the period of classical antiquity, and some don't even know that the Greek city-states were, states. Yes, during the time of the Peloponnesian War, they were mostly divided into two factions. Yes, the city-states had their colonies. But we're talking about independent political entities, and there was no united Greece. And ancient Greece is not only the territory of the modern Greek state, it also included the coast of the present day Turkey, Sicily, a large part of the Italian peninsula, and there were colonies in the present day Spain, France, in Crimea, everywhere. Next question. Who is the most famous Greek general ever? A. Alexander the Great. B. Themistocles. C. Pyrrhus of Epirus. D. Leonidas. Yeah, I know it depends a little bit on how you measure popularity. But trust me, 99% of the people, if you ask them, will tell you it is Alexander. And this is not entirely true. In fact, it is mostly wrong. In fact, Leonidas is probably the most famous Greek general. Because Alexander was, well, he was great, but he just wasn't Greek enough. Yeah, Alexander was the king of Macedon, which kind of means that he was a Macedonian. And Macedonians were considered something like Hellenized barbarians who spoke a weird dialect. Well, not fully barbarians, but definitely not Greeks. Seriously, when another Macedonian king, also Alexander, currently known as Alexander the First of Macedon, who died a century before Alexander the Great was born. So, when this Alexander decided that he wanted to participate in the Olympic Games, he had to present evidence that he was in fact Greek, because only Greeks were allowed to participate in the Olympics. Macedonians, essentially barbarians, couldn't participate. And Alexander proved that he was a descendant of some Greeks before the commission, and only after that he was admitted to the games. There's also a joke that the Persian army probably had more Greeks than the army of Alexander the Great. The funniest thing about this joke is that it is apparently true. Let's talk about another Greek but not quite general. Pyrrhus of Epirus. Most people know him for his pyrrhic victory achieved at the Battle of Esculum, when he was fighting Romans. And everybody knows that pyrrhic victory means a victory that came at too great a cost. How heavy were the losses during the pyrrhic victory at the Battle of Esculum? A. 90% of the army. B. 80% of the army. C. 50% of the army. D. 10% of the army. According to the data that we have from the sources, well, we don't really know. But we have estimates. And the estimates are D. 10% of the army. Yes, Pyrrhus won the battle. It is reported that he lost so many men that when someone tried to congratulate him, he answered, one more victory like this and I'll be out of soldiers. But the losses were not that heavy, around 3,500. The problem actually was not the number, but the fact that Pyrrhus was in the foreign territory, and these losses were irreplaceable. And he understood that perfectly, because he was one of the best generals of antiquity. People just remember him for one isolated episode and one phrase taken out of context, and sometimes assume that he was incompetent. That's simply not true. Next question. When ancient Greek language was spoken? A. Until 300 BC. B. Until AD 300. C. It is not a spoken language. D. It is not a language. And the answer is complicated. There is more than one way to look at the problem, but the closest is probably D. It is not a language. Yeah, ancient Greek is not exactly a language, but more like a term for a variety of ancient Greek languages and dialects. Most of the time, it includes all of the Hellenic varieties that were used roughly until the end of the classical era, which means basically until the death of Alexander the Great. Sometimes Koine Greek, which emerged during the Hellenistic period, is also included in this ancient Greek umbrella term. Depends on the scholar and the regional tradition. For example, if you open a Wikipedia article in English, it boldly tells you that ancient Greek was used roughly until 300 BC. And then you switch the language and you see that ancient Greek now includes Koine Greek as well. All of the main varieties of the so called ancient Greek are related, but they are different, even the closely related dialects. Koine Greek, this is the language of the Bible, among other things. So it evolved mostly from the Attic Greek. But it is not this Attic of Plato or Aristotle. And it is not the language of Homer, which is a different beast. If you want to read Epictetus, Plato, and Homer, you need to be more or less proficient not in one ancient Greek, but in at least three different ancient Greek languages. Next question. Who was Socrates? A. A Greek philosopher. B. Plato's teacher. C. A fictional character. D. A legendary philosopher. All of these answers are correct, including C, a fictional character, and D, a legendary philosopher. And I should say, especially C and D. People kind of misunderstand this. Socrates left nothing in writing. All of the accounts about him are essentially anecdotes from sources like Diogenes Laertius, and the writings of his students, like Plato and Xenophon. We cannot be 100% sure that Socrates actually existed, or how different he was from the character of Socrates presented to us by Plato and Xenophon. Or to be more precise, two slightly different characters of Socrates, because Plato's Socrates and Xenophon's Socrates are not identical. Even some of the circumstances of his life are described differently. For example, Plato tells us that the Oracle of Delphi said that there was no man wiser than Socrates. And Xenophon tells us that there was no man more free, more just, or more sound of mind than Socrates. Is it relevant what the Oracle actually said? No. It is relevant only in the context of each particular work of Plato and Xenophon. And it is also a very good way to make a transition to our next question, because our next question is about the Oracle of Delphi. Why did the Greeks believe the oracle if it could be bribed? A. They were idiots. B. It was never bribed. C. Cultural thing. D. Oracle is a myth. And the answer is it's a cultural thing. And some people just find it hard to understand. Well, not some, most people, because they are not ancient Greeks and they don't practice ancient Greek religion. Sometimes you ask modern people why they still visit church, follow church rituals, and so on, when certain religions and certain denominations have a very troubled history, and even right now, as we speak, they are drowning in all sorts of outrageous and scandalous things. Come on, look at the Catholic Church. There are different explanations for that. And one of the most popular from the theological point of view is that, yeah, there are bad people in the church and occasionally they do horrible things. But the church as a whole, as an institution, remains holy, so to speak. The rituals remain valid and the faith remains intact. People listen to this, nod their heads. It all makes sense if you're a believer. And then the very same people go like, well, Greek idiots knew that the oracle at Delphi could be bribed and actually has been bribed numerous times, but still they took it seriously, treated it as something sacred, listened to these drug-induced ramblings of a priestess. Uh, yeah, they did. More or less for the same reasons as you. Next question. Which of the Greek philosophers was a slave? A. Diogenes of Sinope. B. Phaedo of Elis. C. Epictetus. D. Plato. All of them were slaves at some point of their lives. Yeah, all of them. Even Plato, who is sometimes accused in our weird modern times in stuff like he defended slavery, together with Aristotle. Which is, first of all, nonsense, and second, it is a different subject. People actually misunderstand slavery and different forms of slavery that existed during the history of mankind. Well, and the forms that exist right now. You know, like prisoners or people who have an appointed legal guardian. They are, yes, they can be easily classified as slaves. And that's how they frequently were classified in the ancient world. So, yeah, a person also could be enslaved as a result of hostilities or, captured by pirates and sold at the market. Diogenes, Phaedo, and Plato were captured at some point, and Phaedo was captured as a child. Only Epictetus was actually born a slave. But he's from a different period, and I included him only because he's probably the most famous slave philosopher of all times. And since we're talking about philosophy, in a way, the last question will be about philosophy as well. Who is the ancient Greek god of philosophy? A. Athena. B. Zeus. C. Apollo. D. Plato. And the answer is Plato. Some people think that Plato was just a human being. This point of view is inaccurate. It contradicts the facts, and it is insulting to Plato. I think it's the perfect way to finish this video. Well, pretty much any video. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and stuff. And see you soon.